My name is Edward H. Dietrich, and I'm 65 years old.
Ed, the purpose of this interview today is to talk a little bit about your time growing up in Deerfield Beach and your parents' time in Deerfield Beach, because you're a several generation Deerfieldian. And so what we want to hear about are some of the exciting times that you had and some of the memories that you had, both with your parents and maybe your grandparents, who, as you were growing up. So if you want to start back at the earliest memory of your grandparent or when they came to Deerfield, and then we'll work forward.
Yep. Actually, my grandparents were never Deerfieldians, but they were Floridians by migration. My mother actually was born and raised in West Palm Beach. Her family came down from Wisconsin in 1908 to West Palm. She grew up on Old Military Trail in West Palm, which had the original Army Shell Rock Road from the Second Seminole Indian War, still had the wagon wheel ruts in it from the artillery and the baggage trains. And my father was a Western New Yorker. He met my mother on a blind date when he was on leave from the United States Naval Academy, and such began a whirlwind romance of about 4.5 years. And they were married in 1941, before the war started. But they had a lot of, and he had family connections in West Palm and Lake Worth as well from the 1930s. So that's how all those family movements came to take place after the war. He came back from the Pacific, and they settled in Fort Lauderdale in Victoria Park. It wasn't as nice it is then as it is now, by the way. But in 1947, he had gone to work for Wilbur Kretz and W.A. Hart, who were builders in Fort Lauderdale. They decided they needed to have their own supply of concrete blocks, so they bought a little property in Deerfield, and that became Deerfield Builder Supply. And they put my father in charge of it. So that was his first Deerfield connection. Bought them out over a period of time, and we finally made the move up here in 1954. I was born in 1950, and so that was our move. And I grew up in one of the little Cosby cottages over on the beach in Deerfield. It's right next to the giant parking garage now. It's still there, still got the original tile roof that I had to whitewash every summer. Thank you, Dad. Why didn't you let me do it during the winter? But so that was our Deerfield connection. So, along with my two sisters, and so we all grew up here. I went to schools here when they're, appropriately. I went to Deerfield Elementary, Deerfield Junior High. There was no Deerfield Senior High then, so went to Pompano, as did my two sisters. And and then, of course, while we were here, the business grew, and so we got pretty firmly entrenched in all the various activities that a family does with school and church. We were parishioners at the Community Presbyterian over our pastor and a beloved friend and a member of the family, perhaps, as he was with so many. And
well, you lived close to the beach, so
yes.
Obviously you had a lot of connection to the water and to the beach. Are there some specific stories that you might remember from back then?
Yeah, well, a couple right where we were on the island, so to speak. We didn't have air conditioning, so during the summer when it got hot, it never cooled off at night. So Dad would pack us and Mom would pack us all up. 10 o'clock at night, we'd head for the beach and we'd go swimming. My sisters would send me out further into the water in case there were sharks around. So, but that was kind of a routine. So yeah, we spent a lot of time at the beach day in and day out, and at night, interestingly enough. And the other, where we were as a kid, and even up through high school, we used to spend a lot of time over on the island. And back then, before the condominiums were built on 19th Avenue, there was no seawall. It was just woods and then a rock and sand beach. So we'd go down there, we'd get our inner tubes and our peach baskets and put our camping gear in there and skinny dip and on our way over the island, and we'd spend the weekends over there quite frequently. So, and our parents never worried about us because they kind of knew where we were. There was only one way on and one way off.
Now, when you're talking about the islands, what exactly are you talking about?
Well, what is now Deerfield Island Park, and I know a lot of people refer to it as Capone Island. We heard all the urban legends and all that sort of thing. To us, it was just the island, or it was our island, because we kind of owned it. All the old trails that were cut through there were made by our little band of brothers. And in high school, the girls would come along with us on occasion as well. So,
Did you have boats?
yeah, we did have, we had boats. My dad actually bought a lot in which he eventually, he and my mother built on in Little Harbor on the lagoon. So my dad bought that lot in the early 60s and immediately put a dock in, and we kept we had a 16-foot runabout. So we'd take that out and run it up and down the intercoastal, take it up to Boca or down to Hillsborough and out in the ocean, do a little fishing, that sort of thing. My dad built a pram sailboat, and the younger of my two sisters and I learned to sail in Lake Boca. And yeah, we'd put that little pram in the water in the lagoon, and we would literally sail it up to the lake and back. There wasn't as much boat traffic back then, in the 50s and 60s. So, but yeah, boating was a pretty big part of our life.
What can you tell us you feel is the difference today between the time that you grew up and what's happening? Oh, okay. We're going to take a break in a couple minutes because the bell's going to ring.
Yeah. I think the difference between the environment was safe. It was not uncommon for us to hop on our bicycles with a bag lunch and head up to the Boca Raton Inlet. We used to, when on the weekends, used to spend a lot of time up there. And again, parents always kind of knew where we were, and we were always together, so we were kind of taking care of each other. Nobody ever got into any predicaments. So that was, there was a sense of safety, I think, and so we were pretty mobile as kids, and were able to get out and about. Certainly not as much traffic, obviously not as many roads, and all that sort of thing. So it was a good time and a great place for a kid to grow up. And of course, we had all the activities that you would expect from school. Little league, scouting, all those sorts of things. So it was, it was just a good all-American little town to grow up in.
Okay. Let's just take a break now before the bell rings.
Yeah.
It will ring.
It will ring.
It will ring. That we talked about at the break. I'm trying to remember what they were. A senior moment. But one was your service.
Oh, I was in the Coast Guard from 1972 through 1976, and it was a great experience. I had a very low draft number, and I knew I was going to go somewhere. So I got accepted to the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard OCS. I went down, I sat with my dad, who's a Navy guy, and I said, I want to do something a little different. I think I'm going to do Marine Corps. So I went down to the recruiting office in Miami to sign up. The Marine Corps recruiter was out to lunch, literally, and the Coast Guard guy was there. He says, oh, I know you. I have your file. Sign here. And I literally changed my mind on the spot. So, but it was a great experience. And
now, you said you wanted to say something about your father's experience.
Yeah, my dad.
What was his name?
Edward Paul Dietrich. And if you travel around downtown Deerfield, you will see Ed Dietrich Senior Avenue. That's him. And very honored to have a street named after him. And he was a very, we'd like to say, a very quiet philanthropist. He helped a lot of people, didn't make a big deal out of it. He just did what needed to be done. So, but he was a member of the United States Naval Academy class of 1940. And he left the academy early, but he got his commission at Northwestern University in the V-12 program. So he was commissioned in late 1940. The Navy sent him to Cornell University to engineering school. And then as soon as actually prior to that is when he and my mother married. She was teaching school on Gasparilla Island on the West Coast. And she hopped on the phosphate train and hitched a ride up to Ybor City in Tampa. He had just graduated, got his commission. I drove his brand new car down from Chicago, and they rendezvoused in Ybor. He proposed to her on the train platform. They went to the famous Columbia restaurant to have their celebration dinner and drove over to Lake Worth and got married 4 days later, and then back to Cornell. So and then he was engineering officer on a minesweeper that was being built in Maine. So he and my mother lived in Rockland, Maine for about 4 months, and then worked their way down the coast, went to Boston and to put on armaments, and then to Yorktown for training. And then they were, his ship, the Tapacola, was the first ship home ported at Port Everglades, which was a brand new naval. Back then, Key West was a huge naval base and facility. So, but they figured even before the war started that most of the action was going to be a little bit more to the north. So they positioned themselves there. So he was there, and then his first commanding officer position was on the minesweeper Taraco, which was also home ported in Port Everglades. And then from there, he went to the Pacific and took command of a minesweeper in the Aleutians during the campaign against the Japanese up there. So he saw a lot of action and a lot of rough weather, as it turns out. And so he was up there and then was in the Pacific through the end of 1944. He participated in the Marianas campaign, as he would say. He had a front row seat at Saipan for the invasion there. So they got in so close. You know, the minesweepers have to go in first to clear the waters so the landing craft can go in. So he said we were so close. We didn't worry about the Japanese big guns because they couldn't depress low enough to actually hit us. So so he was there, and so he was in the Marianas, participated in the liberation of Guam, and so he was out there for a while. Then came back to the States, took command of another minesweeper at Yorktown, and then got orders back to the Pacific to get ready for the invasion of Japan. So fortunately for him, minesweeper guys, they're especially in an operation like that, had a pretty short lifespan. So that was not going to be a good thing. So the capitulation of the Japanese was a blessing to him. But at any rate, he was already out there, and then they took a squadron, or I guess you'd call it a squadron of minesweepers. He was the senior officer afloat at the time, to Japan, to Sasebo, which was just south of Nagasaki. And he was there for about 4 months sweeping mines, just basically, theirs and ours. And then was released from active duty, and it took him 3 weeks to get back to Florida from Japan, but which seems like forever nowadays, but back then that was pretty fast. So you go on an airplane, and then a ship, and then a train, and so finally got back here. But he stayed in the reserves and retired as a commander in the Naval Reserve. So during a little Deerfield connection, Lambert Johnson was the first, I guess we would call him an executive director of the Chamber of Commerce in Deerfield, and his wife, Cora, was my first grade teacher at Deerfield Elementary. But they had their family house up in the mountains of North Carolina. So every summer, my dad would go off on his 2-week summer cruise, training cruise, and then my mother would pack all of us up, and we would go retrieve him. It could have been in Mobile or Pensacola or Charleston or Norfolk or someplace, and then we would head for the mountains of North Carolina to stay with the Johnsons for 2 weeks. So he took him, pretty neat for a guy with a growing business and all the other responsibilities he had, but he took a month off every summer to do his Navy duty and to take a little vacation with his family. So that was great. But Lambert, he was a real character. And
you wanted to tell us about Cracker Day.
Yeah. Cracker Day, and my my learning experience was in the word cracker from the bullwhipping, because we knew all about the Florida cowboys who rode around on their little cow ponies or marsh tackies, I think as we knew them, and I think they were more often, because the expanses of the cattle pasturage was so big that you didn't herd them so much as you chased them. So they were cow hunters, is what my mother referred to them as. and having grown up with some up in western Palm Beach County. So that's how we knew the derivation of the name Cracker. So we had Cracker Day in Deerfield. It was a huge thing, and they would start the barbecue 3 or 4 days ahead of the event on a Saturday. And growing up on the beach, in that time of the year, most of the breezes were coming from the west, so we got nothing but barbecue for 3 or 4 days before the big event. But it was a huge thing, big, Little League baseball games, all kinds of festivities going on. But the barbecue was certainly the big element. But a lot of entertainment. One of the interesting things that happened on Cracker Day in Deerfield was a young politician who was running for governor, Leroy Collins, was making the rounds down here, and they had a gap in their schedule. So his assistant said, hey, there's some kind of thing going on in a little town called Deerfield Beach. Maybe we ought to go up and spend some time up there. And they talked about it and found out it was this Cracker Day thing, and it was the farmers celebrating the end of the harvest season and all that kind of tie-in. And they said, well, maybe we ought to dress the part. So they took him to the local Five and Dime, and Leroy Collins, candidate for governor, shows up at Cracker Day in Deerfield Beach in his bib overalls and a straw hat and with a red bandana. So that was a big deal. And of course, that I'm sure he got a lot of votes here just for making that appearance. But that was my most profound Cracker Day memory, even as a little kid.
Wonderful. I want to go back to cracking of the whips again, and I'd like you to expand upon how the cattle were herded with the dogs and the whips, and that the whipping and the crack of the whip was really where the name came from, because we didn't quite explain it enough.
Yeah. The Cracker Day being the ultimate derivative of the word cracker, which referred to the cracking of the whips of the cow hunters or cowboys who were attempting to herd or hunt this huge proliferation of meat cattle that we had in southern Florida. And by southern Florida, I would say draw a line between Cape Canaveral and Tampa. And and the big cattle operations. And Punta Gorda on the west coast was a big shipping point for cattle to Cuba, of all places, and especially during the Spanish-American War. That's really when it kind of ramped up, and so that's the derivation of that word. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about maybe some buildings, the landscape of Deerfield during the time that you were growing up. Where was the center of town? Did you have some hangouts? Were there some ice cream parlors? What was going on? What was the feel?
Yep. Old downtown Deerfield, basically where City Hall is now. And of course, that's a relatively new building. But there was still that strip of old buildings over there. The post office was in one of them. I remember our post office box number was 921. And I would go to the lumberyard after school, but I wasn't tall enough to reach it. So my dad built this little wooden stool with a handhold in it. I would carry it across from the lumberyard. I would go over to the post office. I would set it down. I'd get up there and I'd open, retrieve the mail, put it. I had a little mail sack, and then I would, take it back there. And all the business mail, the personal mail, all of it came to the same box. So that was kind of downtown. There was, the barber shop was there, and but it was, and then where we lived on the beach, there was some kind of long-standing businesses over there. There was certainly a couple of gas stations, interestingly enough, right up on A1A, one at the bend. But we remember Grills Supermarket was there. We did a lot of our grocery shopping there. The famous Red Sails restaurant, which was Bill Newfer and his kids and are still good friends. And but he was a Cuban immigrant. And so if you wanted to get Cuban food anywhere in this neck of the woods, that's the only place you could get it. But that was there for many, many years. And that whole little strip there. And of course the fishing pier, and it had its own little funky restaurant. So once a week we would go there for some of their greasy hamburgers. And of course the old wooden fishing pier was decimated by Hurricane Donna. So and then eventually it met its demise. And then our new pier was constructed. And growing up, especially during the summer when they were pounding the pilings in for the new pier, we had, having no air conditioning, we had the windows open, and they'd start pounding those pilings at about 5 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, you better, if you want to get a good night's sleep, you better go to bed at 8 because something's going to wake you up. So.
I had a question in my mind, and it totally went vacated. Oh, tell me about the Riverview restaurant.
Yeah, Riverview, a classic. Bill Stewart was and it still remains a very dear friend of ours. Still going strong at, I don't know how old he is. He's 90, I suppose. But it was a great place, a packing house in its early days, and went through a lot of interesting evolutions in that period of time. Had a lot of, I think, the a lot of gangsters came and went from there. Like a lot of the places, not only a restaurant and cocktail lounge, but a gambling place. I think one of Bill's and his uncle, Bill Walker, was, or no, I'm sorry, Bill Walker was his general manager, but Bill Stewart's uncle was, they set the tables up. And they were all built out of cypress, the dining room tables, and epoxied over, but with all the original poker chips laid in them. And there are still some of those tables around somewhere, by the way. So that was a pretty unique place. And of course, perfect tie-in with Cap's Place, which was also a pretty well-regarded gambling outpost. And of course, they appealed to the clientele of the Boca Raton Hotel, the Cloisters, the Hillsborough Club. So there was a lot going on there. As things furthered on, the Riverview just settled into being a real first-class restaurant, very unique, had a tremendous menu, had great return clientele. I mean, people like Lee Iacocca, for example, were regulars, that you'd see there, and we enjoyed going there for year after year after year after year. I know one of my sisters had her rehearsal dinner there. We had so many birthday and anniversary celebrations, just because that was, to our family, that was kind of our special place. Along with Cap's Place, Cap's actually, Cossey Lyons Farms was my dad's first big customer. But you go back and look at who were the other original customers. It was the Boca Raton Hotel. It was the Riverview Restaurant. It was Cap's Place. Pat Hassis and my dad were very good friends, and he used to bankroll them all a little bit during the lean summertime. So sometimes we'd eat for free. That was kind of a tradition, but great place. But Bill, and we're gonna get Bill in here so you can interview him, because he's a fountain of knowledge, obviously.
And I've been trying for years, and he's been very reluctant.
Yeah.
I'm hoping with your help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna.
We can crowbar him out of his chair to get him over.
Yeah, he and my wife communicate regularly, so we're gonna lean on her to see if we can get him.
I've heard he's reluctant to speak about those days and the connection with the restaurant and Al Capone and all that stuff, which is fine, and I respect that. But it's so long ago. It's not like it's a negative thing anymore.
A lot of it kind of reverts back to his late wife, Betty Jean. No, Betty Jean.
Betty Jean.
Yeah, and she was very worried about litigation of any kind relative to anything to have to do with the family or the restaurant. And now that he might be more amenable to speaking. But that was the Riverview restaurant was a very, very special place.
Yes, it was. I remember eating there in the 70s. I loved it. Loved it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us some other stories that you might find that would be interesting to those of us who don't know much about the old Deerfield, what it felt like, what it looked like, what it smelled like. Obviously, there were a lot of bean farms out there. Tell us about your association with the farms, and also tell me about how the Deerfield builders grew.
Hmm. Yeah, early on, when we first got here, Deerfield was still, largely agricultural. A lot of vegetable farming. Um, I mentioned before, it was not uncommon during the harvest season to come home on a Friday night and find a basket um, filled with beans or peppers or tomatoes or whatever. Just the farmers would, they gather up and they go around to their friends and they just drop things off. So there was a lot of that going on. There were also some pretty big, the Goolsby Dairy was a pretty big operation that stretched almost all the way out to 441, what was then referred to as the range line. So that was, and over a period of time, the farms shrank, they got converted to development, that sort of thing. Just the usual evolution of things in the area. But that was a big part. I know growing up, so many of my kids were, old Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi farmers. And everybody, I'm sure I had a little bit of a southern accent to go along with it. Now I've become homogenized. So, but then, yeah, it changed, and then, a little bit more tourism, some industry, and of course, certainly, you look at the grand old industrial entity in Deerfield, and Dave Eller, of course, was just here, but moving water industries, or what we used to know as M&W Iron Works, was, the real big deal back then. But yeah, my dad started Deerfield Builder Supply in 1947, gradually bought out the money guys, and actually the last 25% equity in DBS, he traded the house that he built in Victoria Park in Fort Lauderdale to Wilbur Kretz for the last bit of equity. And then the family made the move to Deerfield. But over a period of time, went from manufacturing concrete blocks, and then it started to sell a little bit of lumber and so the windows and hardware and that sort of thing. And it evolved over a period of time, got out of the block making business and just became, kind of a full-fledged lumberyard operation, selling to contractors and homeowners and, some government stuff, and a lot of great institutional business like the Boca Raton Hotel, for example. And over a period of time, just evolved and got into more and more products. When I came back out of the service in 1976, came back and we were still doing those things, also fabricating reinforcing steel. And then we started to get more into the window and door business, started to do a lot more door and millwork business and cabinetry and that sort of thing. So I really became a more full-fledged building material supplier. We did expand to the west coast of Florida, which was a cautionary tale. Probably, in retrospect, probably wouldn't have done that, but it was successful for a while until the Great Recession hit us. So we at our peak, we were doing about 30 million in sales a year. We had 100 employees, and our effect on the local market, I think, you think about having a $4 million payroll in the local market, and paid a lot of property taxes to the county, literally in the millions of dollars. So, and did a lot of, but I think one of the things that we look back most profoundly on is the continuing my dad's philanthropic bent that he had, and we just we just continued. When he retired, he continued to urge us on, and we continued in that vein. So we were able to touch a lot of people and help a lot of people, and always did it quietly. People would ask me, what promotional benefit did you get out of all of that philanthropy? I don't know. We never tried to quantify it. We just did what needed to be done, and we had our favorites, but we supplied over 110 Habitat for Humanity houses. We big supporters, and my dad was on the leadership council for the Boy Scouts. So I can't tell you how many Eagle Scout projects we subsidized, but they were all good, and we liked them because always, they were doing, it wasn't just for the scout himself, but it was for some entity, whether it was a church or the Northeast Focal Point Center was probably one of the biggest ones we ever did. So, those were always worthwhile, but we did a lot of that. And we had some offshore things, Baptist Haiti Mission. We got affiliated with them years and years ago, and we donated or sold at cost probably in excess of 2 million feet of lumber for them to build their health clinics and schools and churches down there. So we cast our philanthropic net pretty widely, but my dad really set the tone for all of that.
Now, what happened to the business and the building, and what's the space?
We were, in a nutshell, bought out some of our family stockholders, and at the time we were, business was great, and we went from no debt to tons of debt, but we could handle it. And then the Great Recession hit, and then we were just not able to, come back out of that. So we finally just kind of literally hit the financial wall, and that was that. And then the bank ended up with the property because we had used that to collateralize the buyout. And so it was unfortunate that now it's all the buildings have been raised, and the site is just as my dad saw it in 1947 when he first built his first building there, which was the curing shed for the concrete block operation. And then he added, a lumber shed, and then a hardware store, and then we went from there. And in later years, we built a large structure to handle. We did a lot of export business, so that was kind of a finish lumber and forest products operation with a place to load containers for our export sales. And then we built a nice building for our rebar fabricating plant. We had one of the most sophisticated ones in Florida at the time. So,
do you know what the property is going to be used for?
About 3 years ago, and part of my plan to try to save the place was to make some encourage some zoning changes, and I got the city to change the zoning uses to include craft breweries and distilleries. That didn't do me any good, but there is going to be a rum distillery there. Yeah, Old Everglades, a guy named Bob Edwards, and I know of Bob for two reasons. One of my sons-in-law is a manufacturer of paddle boards, and Bob is one of his customers. So that's how I first heard about this guy. But turns out he is a friend of Jeff Anderson from Storall, and Storall is affiliated with Public Storage, and they're golfing buddies. So that's how those two got connected. But so a rum distillery, a small office building, and a very large self-storage component. Frankly, I don't know how that storage thing, and I really can't speak to that, but I don't know how that coincides with the city's Pioneer Grove master plan, but that's the discussion that's going on now. And it's getting ready to go before Broward County, I know, in the next couple of weeks. Because they do, the city can say thumbs up or something, but the county really does have the final say on a lot of these things. So right now that 5-acre tract that's what it's kind of looking like. And we do know that the the Metropolitan Planning Authority for transit has their eye on the northwest corner to put a train station there. Whether that happens remains to be seen. Apparently there is some political will behind it, so it's likely to happen.
What was the political climate like in Deerfield as a young man growing up, and how has that changed over the years?
There's always an ebb and flow to things. I think back in the day, I'm sure there were some controversies that popped up, now and then, and I can tell my dad was on the commission for a while with Otis Tanner, and they were the ones that really kind of pushed through the erosion control, the groins on the beach, which have worked so well. And I know Boca and Hillsborough Beach both despise us for that, but they were involved in that. That was somewhat controversial, mostly not because people didn't like the idea of keeping the beach stable, or allowing it to grow in some cases, but just the sheer cost of it. Well, in retrospect, in today's dollars, it was nothing. We would never, you could never afford to do it now for a number of reasons, including the EPA. But he was involved in that. I think there was an opportunity to bring the Pittsburgh Pirate organization to Deerfield to set up their spring training here. And my dad, Otis, everybody was all for it. It was a great idea. It was going to be out west here, pretty much where part of Century Village is now. And it just made, and the Pirates really kind of came to us and said, we pick you. Well, that's kind of hard to ignore. Well, there was a very vocal minority that ended up, killing the deal. And after that, my dad said, I don't want anything more to do with this political thing. If we can't get good things done like that, I'll let somebody else fight that battle. But over the years, I think, generally things were pretty stable. In recent years, I think the political environment it has become a little bit more toxic, and that's unfortunate. You think back to the leadership in the past, and I always think of Dick Mowry, who was one of our great historical society members and a fantastic mayor. But he was the voice of reason. There was a nobility and a calmness about how he led the city that I think everybody should want to emulate. That kind of an attitude.
Any other story that you want to share with us about growing up here, your family, the climate, not the weather, but the climate of Deerfield?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's changed. Just like everything. Back in the day, I remember my dad commuting from Fort Lauderdale to Deerfield, and on US 1 there was like a gas station, a grocery store, and another gas station between there and here, in 10 or 12 miles. And now we're a county of, 1.6 million people? So yeah, it's changed. I think the population of Deerfield when I went off to college was probably 6,000. And then, college and then off to the service. So basically gone for, about 8 years. And then when I came back, all of a sudden, now the population's, 20-something thousand, then it just started to grow from there. And then we've had annexations. And so it's just, less a small town. But, back in the day, it was, because of the nature of the economy, it was the farms, the small tourist operations, on the beach, just a little bit of industry. So, and everybody kind of knew each other. And you knew each other from church, from school, from Little League, from this thing. I know Boy Scouts, Steve Welch was, when my dad was so busy with, not only the lumberyard, but he was also involved in banking. He was chairman of the board of Deerfield Bank and Trust, which then was purchased by Southeast Bank. He was on the board of advisors of Southeast. He wishes that they had listened to him more. But so there was, a lot of those, kind of, connections. But I think during that period of time in scouting, Steve Welch was kind of my surrogate father on a lot of occasions, because my dad was he was doing his thing. So, but and I grew up with the Vincamolder boys, and and they were wooden shoe nursery, and they were kind of agriculturists, if you will. They were kind of out west there. So you had this interesting mix of the people that lived out west in what is now Coconut Creek or West Deerfield. And then you had the people on the beach, and then you had the kind of the old pioneer families that were really still kind of in town. So that was, but everybody kind of mixed it up, and it was really pretty unique. I think another thing was this was in the days of segregation. And we started to desegregate just as I was getting into junior high. I think at Deerfield Junior High we had, maybe 4 African-American students. Interestingly, there was a guy named Gene Andrews who was probably the coolest kid in school. He was really smart, the best athlete, had the best voice, the whole, and I really would like to find out what happened to Gene Andrews. There's a story in itself. So, but that was a kind of an underlying current the whole way. I remember at the lumberyard, my dad, typically commercial establishments, you had 3 bathrooms. You had men, women, and colored. And my dad one day said, no, we're not doing that. I got 2 bathrooms. And he had people that would come in and say, where's the 3rd bathroom? And my dad would say, in this place there's 2. There's men, there's women. You know which one you are and you go. And had people walk away from that. So it was, those were interesting times. By the time I got to high school at Pompano, still the process going forward. But there was a fair amount of, more black students coming in, but there was still, that undercurrent was there. I know the football team, my spring practice of my junior year had probably 100 guys come out for football, 40 of them probably African Americans. The coaches, and I can say this publicly because I wrote about it in the school newspaper, they were very racist. And they chased off all but 2 of those guys, and Charlie Box and Mike Butler from Deerfield. And even on the road, I was there. They had 4 guys to a room when we'd go to Gainesville or Key West for road games. And Bob Gerber and I, Charlie Box and Mike Butler were roommates, and I was proud of it. I had my own teammates spit on me, but that's life, and you continue on.
I wanted to ask you very briefly if you could tell me about Goolsby Farms, because I know Goolsby Road, but nobody ever talks about Goolsby Farms.
Yeah, there were, Goolsby, pretty, I tend to think of them, I think correctly, more, cattle rather than, cattle people rather than farm people. And I'm sure they probably did some farming as well. But I recall, over a period of time that the Goolsbys, as development came on, and again, big pieces of property like where Century Village is, for example, Deer Creek, a lot of cattle up that way. And then, even out where I have lived for so long, out there you had the Medlin Dairy and the Rux Dairy, and they were all friends. Some of the Medlin kids actually came to school in Deerfield. That's how I got to know them. But then ultimately, all of them ended up moving their operations up to around Okeechobee. Yeah.